Everyone, I'm really thrilled to be introducing today's first external speaker, Professor John Keane, who is one of the world's leading political philosophers. He's a professor of politics at the WZB Berlin Social Science Centre and at the University of Sydney, where he spends part of the year. He's the author of the first full-scale biography of democracy in more than a century, The Life and Death of Democracy, a number of books on the media and politics, in particular authorised biography of the late Václav Havel. And he's been described many ways, including as one of Australia's great intellectual exports and one of the UK's leading thinkers. So I'm really delighted that Professor Keane has made time to speak with us this morning about the role of public broadcasters in Trump's post-truth era. Please join with me in making him welcome.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Well, I would like to say wassalam and salamat pagi and tsao shang hao and dobro jutro and good morning, everybody. It's a great honor to be in the ranks of the fake news folks, the band of liars. You're also called the opposition party. And what I want to do this morning in a quarter of an hour is tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about post-truth. This is a pretty serious subject, and what I'd like to do in these few minutes is to persuade you that this is not a passing phenomenon, and that as journalists in the public service field, you have a serious obligation to take this issue seriously and to think deeply about the deeper trends that are driving this whole phenomenon of what's being called post-truth. It's no news to you. You are a platform that is caught up in this unfinished communications revolution. This is the first time in the history of communications that text, sound, and image are conjoined, in which digital networks effectively bust time-space barriers. And you know that there has been tremendous excitement about the potential of this unfinished communications revolution. Lots of talk of e-democracy and so on, some 20 years ago. That's fading, and I think we're becoming aware that there are decadent trends that are part of this communications revolution, and I think post-truth, as it's being called, is one of them. The term itself won the Oxford Dictionary's 2016 award for the best neologism of the year, and that's true also in Germany and in a number of other languages. When you look at it, when you drill down into it, you'll find that the term is pretty woolly. And the origins of the term are disputed. Some say that a blogger in 2012 was the first to use it. It actually goes back to a Serbian-American playwright named Steve Tesic, who in the early 1990s actually wrote this piece, which you can find online, that talks about a future reflecting on Watergate and other scandals where, in fact, politics, he said, is coming to sort of junk principles of truth. So we're heading, he warned, if we don't do something about it, towards a post-truth world. That I think you probably know about. When you look at what post-truth means, I think it's clear, or it should be clear, and I want to say to you that it's actually a sort of salmagundi. It's like a dog's dinner of phenomenon. And I can see three aspects of this post-truth. One is old-fashioned lying. It's flourishing as never before in politics and in the corporate world and elsewhere. It happens, of course, in bedrooms and it happens around kitchen tables. But that's of a different order than big lies that are told. And lying is, to put it simply, saying things that willfully you know are not so. That's what a lie is. The liar always presumes some sense of truth in the back of her or his mind. This post-truth phenomenon also includes bullshit, if I may use that word on or off air. It's a technical term. America's great philosopher Harry Frankfurt has written a wonderful small book on bullshit and wants to point out, I think rightly, that it's spreading for all kinds of reasons. The bullshitter tries, it's like excrement with no nutrient. The bullshitter tries to persuade you that, you know, she or he is a really good person, and what the effect is to set aside all questions of veracity, of truth. It's dangerous, Harry Frankfurt reminded us. I think as well that there is, wrapped up in this post-truth phenomenon, there is the whole problem of silence. It's an interesting question and a deep question for journalists and for intellectuals and others as to how it is that whole societies fall silent about really big topics. You know, why is it that there's hardly any coverage of the fact in this rightful concern about forcible expulsions of people by the Trump administration, that this has been going on, actually, for nearly a decade. Some 2.5 million people were forcibly removed from the United States under the Obama administration. So this is a continuation of that trend, and yet there's a silence about it. Now, when you look at post-truth as a phenomenon seen in this way, a combination of lies and bullshit and silence, when it's used by governments, it is, I think, and we're beginning to see, not only in the United States, but in the Philippines, in the Dutch election, which is about to happen, in the French elections that are going to happen in May, we're beginning to see that the old word gaslighting deserves a revival. I don't know if you have come across this. It's named after principally a 1944 film by George Cukor, featuring Ingrid Bergman and Charles Boyer. It was first screened here in Australia in 1945, I think in February 1945. And basically, the term gaslighting refers to the way that powerful people grind those they rule into submission by confusing them, by damaging their judgment, by inducing a sense of uncertainty about things. That is gaslighting. And what I would say is that this phenomenon of post-truth in the hands of governments, it's not just Trump, but he's a master at it, is a phenomenon of gaslighting, and it's extremely dangerous for democracy because it ruins pluralism, it damages institutional diversity, and it generally spreads in public life an acceptance of the tropes and the cliches, the lies, the bullshit, and of course the silences. Let me give you just one example of gaslighting in action. It's Duterte, the current president of Philippines, who just a few months ago, when a mayor was shot and killed in a so-called drug raid, had this to say. He was killed in a very questionable way, said Duterte, but I don't care. The policeman said he resisted arrest. Then I will stick with the story of the police because they are under me. He went on to say, I might go down in history as the butcher. It's up to you, speaking to his audience. And then he added, since I have nothing to show, I just use extrajudicial killing. That's because I have no credentials to boast about. Now, that was all a bit much in a couple of sentences. So his PR man, right of hand Ernesto Abella, said this: it's a matter of leadership style and the messaging style of the president. This is his messaging style to underline his intention. He's serious about it. However, it's just meant to underline his seriousness in making sure that nobody is corrupt and involved in criminality. That, I think, is gaslighting in action. And if you were confused by that string of sentences, you are rightfully confused, because that's the point, that this mixture of lies and bullshit and silence is a toxic mixture, and when it's flung out through various media, it comes to have effects that are confusing for millions of people, and that's the point of gaslighting. Now, the question is whether this is, for me, and I'm sure it's been on your minds for some months or possibly a year or two now, is whether this is a passing phenomenon. I think that one has to be nuanced here. Of course, it's true that lying in politics is a very old art. You don't have to read Machiavelli, and you don't have to reflect on Harry Truman's remark about Richard Nixon, that he lies out of both corners of his mouth, and he likes to lie just to keep his hand in. It's a very old phenomenon. And bullshit, let's call it saloon bar bullshit. Buying 100 beers for your mates in Longreach, which happened just in the last couple of days. This is an old art. And silence. I've tried to write about silence. I think it's an important political problem, is of course always been part of whole polities. But what I would say to you is that this communications revolution, which is unfinished and you're caught up in, is not a self-cleaning oven. It flourishes, it ensures that post-truth flourishes, and it does so, I think, by virtue of the very structures of communication that are part of this revolution. In plain English, this is the period in which mashups are very easy to produce. You may know that Donald Trump's very first campaign ad showed a border with people trying to cross. The ad claimed it was Mexicans trying to enter the United States. In fact, it was an image taken from Morocco. And that kind of photoshopped material is, of course, spreading, and it's easy in an age where this revolution makes copying and circulation a very cheap and easy phenomenon. We're living in the age of imposter news sites that use URLs. I don't know if this has happened yet to SBS, but abc.com.co was a serious fake site. There are fantasy news sites like WTOE5 that created the Pope Francis, loves Donald Trump story, and they use tools like Clone Zone and now this. There are these this is an era of the shareable made-up news, Macedonian teenagers making a few American dollars by putting out fake news. It's an era in which memes are much easier, thanks to Twitter and so on. And there are all sorts of parody accounts that are flourishing, not only The Onion, which claims to be America's finest news source. All of this, in other words, post-truth, becomes much easier to circulate, to produce and to circulate in this communications revolution. And I would say that there are three novel things about it if you think about it historically. That is, we're caught up in a period where something much deeper and bigger is going on, and the three things that are pretty striking when you think about it is, first of all, post-truth and gaslighting has developed the longest legs ever in the history of communications. Ultimately, gaslighting is global, a global problem. Everybody knows about Donald Trump's latest tweet. And certainly the whole Muslim world knows in the present that they are threatened by the maneuverings and the sayings of this administration. So global legs in a way that wasn't possible in the era of the newspaper or radio or television, never mind the telegraph. There is a second novelty, I think, about this gaslighting, and it is that gaslighting penetrates very deeply into our lives. I've always been struck by the fact that the newspaper could be left on the kitchen table, or you could use it to light a fire or wrap fish in. You could switch off the radio, you could switch off the television. But insofar as these digital networks penetrate daily life, it means that gaslighting, bullshit, lying, silences, post-truth, actually enter deeply into our daily lives. And there's a third big thing going on, it seems to me, that marks off gaslighting, post-truth as a serious and deepening problem. And it has everything to do with the present-day institutional decay of parliamentary representative democracy. Membership of political parties declining and at an all-time low since the beginning of the universal franchise. The dislike of politicians, of politics, the refusal to honour parliaments as a legitimate institution. I mean, this is the soil in which the new populism grows. And I would say, it's no news to you, that this new populism, which has a long history, but it's back big time, and it's a global problem, as much in the Philippines or Thailand as in the United States, as here in Australia. This new populism is the big champion of gaslighting. It rails against corrupted establishments, corrupted politics. It appeals to the people. It has, of course, a definition of what the people is, and by definition, some people don't belong in the people. It feels democratic, and it is, I think, being nurtured in the soil of this decay, this deepening decay of parliamentary representative institutions. And we would feel it, we would feel the pinch of it much more if, for example, we didn't have compulsory voting in this country. I am sure of this. Where this takes us, where this gaslighting, where this populism, where this disaffection with parliamentary representative democratic politics is taking us, is a question that I have no time to talk about because I will be guillotined by Ben. I want to ask, finally, what is to be done, what can be done about if I'm right, about this strengthening grip of post-truth, of gaslighting on actually existing democracies. What can be done? One hopeful thought is that gaslighting is not altogether internally consistent. When President Trump kicked off his re-election campaign last weekend in Melbourne, not Melbourne here, but Melbourne, Florida, you will know that at the very beginning of this rousing populist rant, he said, "We're here today to speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." That might come back to bite him, because, in other words, what I'm saying is that this post-truth phenomenon bids farewell and celebrates, lies as normal and bullshit is fine, actually keeps alive. It contains within it references to truth that can, of course, be used by citizens, by elected representatives, by journalists, by lawyers and courts and others. It is the period, it seems to me, on the question of what is to be done, where there is a temptation to come back to the language of truth versus lies, facts versus opinions, objectivity versus subjectivity. More than a few scholars of journalism and more than a few journalists are warning that we have to go back to these old-fashioned, once thought indispensable, then somehow called into question principles of objectivity. Fact versus opinion. One good friend of mine who is known to you but whose name I cannot mention is at the moment talking that point up very large indeed. And that call to return to fact is associated with some strange trends, I have to say. For example, Spain's ruling party has proposed the abolition, the banning of memes. I mean, this has serious implications for freedom of communication, but they think that that's the only way in which to kill this serpent of post-truth. In Italy, there has been proposed during the past year setting up a truth commission where certain experts validate what broadcasters and other media do. That strikes me as rather strange, to say the least. There are proposals for watermarking all kinds of products. That would cause you considerable anxieties, that every program ought to be watermarked for its veracity. And how do you do that? And who is the judge of truth? These questions are unclear. The German government is proposing that there be, for instance, that Twitter and Facebook should be hauled into the courts and held accountable for the post-truth stuff that they circulate. As you can tell, I'm a skeptic of this, and I'm not, I have to confess to you, I could get down on my knees, I'm not a great champion of truth. And here we could have a good philosophical discussion. There are authors like Gianni Vattimo, the great Italian thinker, who has shown, I think, very persuasively that there is a history to truth. And you don't have to only read him or Foucault and others to see that actually truth has many faces. As my grandmother used to say, truth has many faces, and if that's the case, then the question becomes harder to answer: how to combat this gaslighting, how to combat post-truth, where we're aware, or ought to be aware, that reality is always framed, that what counts as truth is controversial, and ought to be kept controversial. So what does this mean for dealing with gaslighting? I think that there are various weapons that we have that will have to be used and are being used. One of them is what ancient Greek Democrats called parrhesia, bold, gutsy, public speech. For instance, the BBC's, I don't know if you've seen it, Real Housewives of ISIS. It generated some 20 million viewers in the first few days, and it includes characters who say things like this: Ali bought me a new chain, which is 8 foot long, says Zena, so I can almost get outside, which is great. Or the jihadi bride Afsana says, it's only 3 days till the beheading and I've got no idea what I'm going to wear. I mean, this is bold. This is bold speech that is designed to protect multiculturalism, to take risks, and of course the sky falls in on you when you do it. I would say that we're likely to see a proliferation of this kind of bold. It's not necessarily, factual reportage, not at all, but it's bold media outputs whose function, whose aim is to weaken the grip of gaslighting. Stop Fake News in the Ukraine. You can have a look at it on YouTube, and if you are a Ukrainian speaker, you will understand it, but you'll get the point that a whole program, public service broadcasting program, consists of entirely fake news, which they do fact-checking of. So they find out which news is fake, and then they project it as if it were real news. This, I'm told by Ukraine friends here in Sydney, is having enlivening effects on public discussion because it teaches citizens to be wiser, to have their antennae up for stuff that is clearly post-truth. There's no doubt that one of the key issues in this era of combating post-truth, if I'm right about it, is the importance of independent monitory scrutiny bodies. Independent watchdogs, the courts, and of course journalism become hugely important as means of combating the kind of toxic qualities, the toxic effects of post-truth. I would say that as far as public service broadcasting is concerned, there are some old rules that have a new prescience, and I see this in your documentary on Pauline Hanson. I see this in Ray Martin's excellent Is Australia Racist?, where I'd say that there's no necessary commitment to the belief that SBS is right or that the presenter is telling you only the truth. It's a kind of documentary, public affairs documentary, that contains within it multiple perspectives and, of course, teaches or suggests to audiences that they should think twice about things. What are these rules? They're very boring. You're probably told this by your executive producers every day or so. Accuracy is important. Spelling names right, getting addresses correct. Take an interest in contrary evidence. Columbia Law School, Columbia Journalism School, has as one of its slogans, if you go there, report against your own assumptions. Build that into your reportage, build that into your filmmaking. Follow the story regardless of its political implications. Try to be calm. Try not to hyperventilate. Some things do induce hyperventilation, but try to resist that. Try to present multiple positions, viewpoints within a story. Identify your sources wherever you can. And I would say finally, in this era of post-truth, if I'm right about its deepening trend, its institutional sources, and its threats to democracy, don't forget jokes. You have a very good humor unit here. This one, forgive me if you've heard it before, was told to me just last week by a good and old Jewish friend of mine. Donald Trump arrives in Israel to open the new American embassy in Jerusalem. Shortly after arrival, he has a massive heart attack, and the medics point out that this is indeed a cardiac arrest and that it's a serious one. The truth is, he's dead. All hell breaks loose. Pandemonium spreads throughout Israel and back to Washington immediately. The question is, what is to be done with the body? The federal agents surround it and guard it nervously. Zionists call out for declaring Donald Trump as a great son of Israel. He should be buried on Israeli soil. A Jewish undertaker comes and says, I have a solution. I can provide nice casket, beautiful flowers. I can do it cheaply. The federal agents look unconvinced, and off record, one of them says, you know, I don't think we can risk that because I heard that quite a long time ago, there was a guy who died, and 3 days later, he was back on his feet again. Thank you very much.